Hi, my name is Dylan Seal. I'm a fourth year undergraduate in the department studying earth science, and today I'm excited to share with you some of the research I've been conducting over the past year with collaborators from IU, IUPUI, the University of Costa Rica, uh, pertaining to the application of scenario earthquakes for analysis of seismically triggered landslide hazard in Costa Rica. So to start off, what is a landslide? The U.S. Geological Survey defines a landslide as the movement of a mass of rock, debris, or earth down a slope. On the right here, you can see a number of different types of landslides, ranging from simple rock falls to more complex debris flow type mass movements. And any of these can be triggered by a number of phenomena. Most commonly, they're triggered by rainfall, but in this study, we'll focus only on earthquake-triggered landslides. So why do we care about these earthquake-triggered landslides? Well, 264 earthquakes have triggered landslides since 1772, equating to over 200,000 fatalities on all habited continents of the globe, which can be seen here on the right, with each of these circles representing an earthquake for which its triggered landslides resulted in fatalities, scaled in size by the number of fatalities. So you can see it really is a global issue that necessitates study. Zooming in a bit more, we focus on earthquake-induced landslides in Costa Rica. On this figure in the right, you can see the 22 different earthquake-induced landslide events that have been documented in Costa Rica since 1772, equating to 98 total fatalities, the deadliest of which was the 2009 Cinchona magnitude 6.1 earthquake, which resulted in 30 fatalities, and occurred in the central volcanic range of the country north of the capital city of San Jose. Here's an example of some damages caused by that earthquake to a jelly factory. So the triggered earthquakes by that 2009 Cinchona earthquake produced devastating and widespread impacts, and one of which was this jelly factory, as you can see here. So to try to understand better earthquake-induced landslides in Costa Rica, we compute 5 different scenario earthquake suites to encompass the range of different geologic, climatic, and tectonic environments present in Costa Rica. And so the first environment we look at is the central volcanic range, which I refer to as the CVR. As you can see here, it's where that 2009 Cinchona earthquake took place. It contains a series of active faults and quaternary volcanoes. To the south of that is the Central Costa Rica Deformed Belt, or the CCRDB, which coincides very closely with the capital city of San Jose. We also look at a number of interplate subduction earthquakes on the Cocos-Caribbean subduction interface, and we obtain the location of that from slab 2.0. So that interface increases in depth, moving further inland in Costa Rica. And we look at those events beneath the northern Nicoya Peninsula as well as the southern Osa Peninsula. And then we look at associated back arc thrust events on the Caribbean coast of the country. And so within each of these earthquake suites, we vary the magnitude and depth based on the historical earthquake record to look at the range of plausible earthquake-induced landslide impacts that are possible at each different location. So here are some more earthquake-triggered landslides from that 2009 Cinchona earthquake. So you can see it really did quite a bit of damage to the central portion of the country. And so the fundamental questions that I want to answer in this presentation are: why do landslides occur in Costa Rica? How do earthquake magnitude and depth impact landslide occurrence? And how can we predict landslide impacts? So the basis of all this work is the use of scenario earthquakes. We compute these using the U.S. Geological Survey shake map system, and they are hypothetical earthquakes, where we specify the location, magnitude, depth, and fault geometry, and shake map provides us with an estimate of ground shaking for that scenario hypothetical event. On the right here is a scenario magnitude 6.5 earthquake in the CCRDB on the Agua Caliente fault to the south of San Jose. So the first question that I really want to understand is: why do landslides occur in Costa Rica? Here are some images from the 1991 Limon magnitude 7.6 back arc thrust earthquake, which triggered really widespread landslide occurrence throughout the Caribbean side of the country. And so to try to answer that question, we use the Global Statistical Earthquake-Induced Landslide Model of Nowicki, Jesse et al. 2018. which incorporates a number of ground failure proxies to spatially predict landslide probabilities. And so the proxies that we look at in this presentation are peak ground velocity, shown on the left here, topographic slope here on the top right, and then on the bottom right, compound topographic index, which is a proxy for the wetness of an area. So why do landslides occur in Costa Rica? To try to begin to answer that, I'm going to look at that same magnitude 6.5 scenario earthquake on the Agua Caliente fault. So here's that shake map again, and on the left here we have a diagram that relates two of the proxies, topographic slope on the y-axis and peak ground velocity on the x-axis, to the predicted landslide probability. So this colored axis here is the average landslide probability for each pixel from all pixels with that corresponding peak ground velocity and slope value. So for example, at a peak ground velocity of 30 centimeters per second and a slope of 50 degrees, the average landslide probability is around 0.8 for all pixels with those corresponding values. And so the big takeaway here is that landslides are most likely to occur when a combination of both steep topographic slope and strong ground shaking are present, and both must be present for high landslide probabilities to occur. You can't just have one, you have to have both. The statistical landslide model that we use from Nowicki Jesse et al. 2018 is a global model, so it's really important that we make sure that those model predictions are applicable to the regional context of Costa Rica. And so that's what this figure is showing for that 2009 Cinchona earthquake, the epicenter of which is denoted here as a yellow star. The observed map landslides from after that event are included here as red polygons, and beneath that are our landslide model predictions. This blue oval represents an area that landslides likely occurred but cannot be mapped because cloud cover distorted aerial imagery. So you can see that our model predictions are overall a good fit to the observations, as all of the landslide occurrences correspond mostly in areas of high predicted probability. So to look at the second question, how do earthquake magnitude and depth impact landslide occurrence? We quantify landslide extent using a variable called Landslide Hazard Index, or LHI as I'll refer to it from now on, which is the sum of all aerial percentage values for a given earthquake. So aerial percentage is the portion of each grid cell expected to contain landslide occurrence. And so we sum all of those pixels to encompass the overall predicted landslide extent. To begin to look at the impact of magnitude and depth on LHI, Landslide Hazard Index, we will look at more scenario earthquakes on that Agua Caliente fault in the central Costa Rica deformed belt. And you can see why we study this fault, because it's really problematic to the population of Costa Rica, which is concentrated around San Jose and Cartago, directly where that fault runs through. So it's really a fault that necessitates a detailed understanding and is problematic from a hazard point of view. So on the top here is a magnitude 6.0 earthquake on that Agua Caliente fault, and the bottom is a magnitude 6.5. So you see that landslide probabilities are higher and more expansive for the higher magnitude event, as you would expect qualitatively, and then more quantitatively, LHI is nearly triple for that 0.5 increase in magnitude. And so from that we derive the relationship that increased earthquake magnitude corresponds to increased LHI. We also look at depth. So the top is a magnitude, the top is a 5-kilometer deep scenario on the Agua Caliente fault, and the bottom is a 15-kilometer depth scenario. So you can see as the earthquake grows deeper, landslide probability is less severe near the epicenter, but is more extensive, as is seen in the marginally higher LHI value. So in general, as you increase earthquake depth, LHI increases. Looking beyond just the Agua Caliente scenario, we can look at each of the other tectonic environments analyzed in this study. So on the left here, in the blue is the Agua Caliente, and the orange is the Cinchona epicenter in the central volcanic range. You can see that increasing magnitude in these environments also increases LHI. And the same is true for each subduction interplate earthquake, with the green representing Nicoya, the northern Nicoya Peninsula, and the red representing the southern Osa Peninsula. So as you increase magnitude, LHI always increases in each of our scenarios. Using this same color scheme, we also look at the impact of depth on LHI. So you can see that for these shallow crustal interplate events in the CVR and CCRDB, as you increase the depth, LHI increases marginally. And depth is a bit different for the subduction events because depth directly controls the location on the plate interface of the subduction event, and so determines how far inland it is, and that is not the same between these two peninsulas, which is partially why there's slight differences. But the overall trend is still the same, where as you increase depth, LHI increases. This plot also hammers home that point. This is on the y-axis cumulative area, and the x-axis is landslide probability. So you can see that moving from a magnitude 7 with the Nicoya scenarios as black lines and the Osa scenarios as red lines, that there are those fundamental differences between the two locations. But the trend is the same, that as you increase magnitude, you have a higher cumulative area of each respective landslide probability value, along with higher maximum landslide probability values. And so to summarize the results from those plots that I just showed, increasing magnitude and depth increases predicted landslide extent. Magnitude is the primary control, and depth is a secondary but significant control, and has a larger influence in the subduction interplate earthquakes as it controls the location of the plate interface and therefore how far inland the earthquake occurs. Lastly, I want to answer how can we predict landslide impacts. To do that, we look at the probabilistic landslide exposure value as defined by Nowicki, Jesse et al. 2020, which is the sum of all population counts per grid cell multiplied by all landslide probabilities per grid cell. And that is meant to encompass the overall potential for exposure to landslide hazard for a given earthquake event. That same paper related this PLEV value to fatality using a regression trained by global observations that we use to predict, and as red circles here, Costa Rican fatality counts for each of our scenario earthquakes. I plot these alongside these black open circles here, which are the global observed fatality for a number of historical earthquakes, and those of which that occurred in Central America are denoted in blue. So this y-axis is log fatality, the x-axis is log PLEV. I also include the 2009 Cinchona earthquake, which had 30 recorded fatalities and plots close to our model predictions. The fatality regression we use also factors in the United Nations Human Development Index, RUNHDI, which is a proxy for the vulnerability. And each of those different UNHDI regressions are included here in different colors. But the big takeaway is that our predicted fatality counts fall within the range of observed fatalities and within the upper percentiles of fatality and PLEV. So they're predicted to have severe impacts. But it's also important to note that these are order of magnitude estimates, and so a lot of different factors like time of day or like building type that aren't accounted for here may drastically influence the actual fatality for each of these earthquake events. And that's why there's so much spread in the observed fatality circles on this graph. We can also look at the impact of earthquake magnitude on PLEV. So you can see that as magnitude increases, PLEV also increases for each scenario location, as you would expect. But interestingly, we noticed that shallow crustal earthquakes in Cinchona at the Central Volcanic Range and the CCRDB at magnitude 6 and 6.5 have similar, if not higher, predicted exposure values than large magnitude 8 or 7.5 subduction scenarios. So the occurrence of these events may be more problematic as they occur much closer to the population of Costa Rica, which is heavily concentrated in the central portion of the country. So to summarize, why do landslides occur in Costa Rica? I find that during ground shaking, a combination of both high slope and high peak ground velocity is necessary for inducing landslides. And then how do earthquake magnitude and depth impact landslide occurrence? Landslide extent increases with depth and magnitude. And lastly, how can we predict the impacts of scenario earthquakes? And I find that each scenario earthquake is predicted to result in large amounts of landslide hazard and large subduction, and moderate-sized crustal earthquakes in the CVR and CCRDB have the highest potential for significant impacts. Lastly, I want to talk a bit about future work that we may explore. So to increase the accuracy of our landslide model predictions, we could incorporate higher resolution proxy data, new ground failure proxies, or create a regionally calibrated model rather than a globally calibrated model. And some of that higher resolution data that may be included is shown here. This is a high resolution geologic map of Costa Rica that could be used to, from our collaborator Paulo Ruiz, that could be used to increase accuracy and precision of model predictions. We may also explore infrastructure modeling, which is shown here on the right. So for a scenario earthquake on the Agua Caliente fault, how are different pieces of critical infrastructure impacted? Here's a portion of the Pan American Highway, National Route 2. And so you can see we predict the different landslide probabilities at a number of points along that route to identify which areas are most likely to be impacted during an earthquake event. That concludes my presentation, and please contact me with any questions that you may have. Thank you.